Hello, I'm Dr. Emily Welty. I'm the Director of Peace and Justice Studies at Pace University in New York City, and I serve as the Vice Moderator of the Church's Commission on International Affairs of the World Council of Churches. We're honored to have 4 distinguished speakers with us in this webinar to help us engage with the issue of killer robots and to launch our new World Council of Churches campaign guide for churches. And we're excited to share this resource, which you will now find available on our website. In November 2019, the Executive Committee of the World Council of Churches expressed their grave concern for the ethical implications of efforts by a number of countries to develop automated weapons systems, which might ultimately remove human control over the selection of targets. More commonly known as killer robots, such weapons would make decisions on who lives and who dies. The Executive Committee proposed that the World Council of Churches join the campaign to stop killer robots in order to contribute its faith-based voice and authority, and called upon WCC member churches to advocate with their governments to support an international ban on autonomous weapons systems. In response to the concerns of its executive committee, this year, the WCC has drafted a campaign guide for churches to better understand the threats posed by the potential development of such weapons. The guide examines some of the theological implications of such weapons. It informs readers about existing activities to respond to the threats of killer robots, and encourages churches and partners to engage in advocacy towards a preemptive ban on their future development. The guide's being launched in English, but will soon be available in other languages in early 2022. Our first speaker is Isabel Jones. Isabel Jones is the campaign outreach manager for Stop Killer Robots. In her role, she manages efforts to expand and strengthen the campaign's network and provides ongoing support through funding, resources, and coordination to build momentum and energize the coalition. Isabel joined the campaign to stop killer robots in June 2018 as its first full-time staff member. Previously, she worked in various roles at Aga Khan Foundation Canada, the LSE Center for Women, Peace and Security, the LSE Center for Human Rights, and Human Rights Watch. Isabel has a Master of Science in Human Rights from the London School of Economics, where her research focused on how applications of new weapons technology within the social structure of the military could result in increased civilian casualties. She also has a Bachelor of Arts in Global Development and an International Studies certificate from Queen's University. We would like to thank the campaign to stop killer robots for the financial support which has made this publication possible. Welcome, Isabel. Could you please start by telling us a little bit more about the campaign to stop killer robots? How did it come into being, and what are some of its objectives?
Of course. And first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for including me in this panel and for putting together such a fantastic resource. So just a little bit of background on the Stop Killer Robots Coalition. The campaign was founded in 2013, and it was really launched by a group of civil society organizations, many of whom had already been involved in other humanitarian disarmament movements, who were increasingly concerned by evidence of growing autonomy in weapon systems. So they were concerned about how remote warfare was proliferating and how more and more weapons were being designed and developed with increasing levels of autonomy in their functioning. So following the model of these previous disarmament movements, the Stop Killer Robots campaign was structured as a broad coalition, a network of civil society organizations working together to call for regulation on these weapon systems. And we as a campaign take a humanitarian disarmament approach, which means that we focus on human security and the humanitarian imperative of doing this work. Fast forward, now the Stop Killer Robots Coalition is a group of more than 180 member organizations working across 66 countries in the world to ensure meaningful human control over the use of force through the development of new international law on autonomy and weapons. Over the past 8 years or so, our campaigners have been creating pressure at the United Nations and in national capitals around the world, lobbying governments to enact progressive policy and proactive policy on this issue. And part of the urgency that we see here is that around the world, we're seeing the growing influence that computer processing and algorithmic thinking has, and these technological solutions and techno-optimism, which often presents technology as kind of, silver bullets that are designed to prioritize precision and efficiency and speed. But often these kind of technological solutions are put forward without the consideration or care given to things like data bias that's present in developing and building those technologies, or really the consequences of removing human understanding, which brings things like context and nuance from decision making. And for us, the kind of ultimate manifestation of this is what we call killer robots, which are weapon systems that are increasingly enabled to use computer processing and programming and sensors to identify and select targets over wider areas and over longer periods of time. So specifically, what we're concerned with is weapon systems that use machine analysis of sensor information to automatically select and engage those targets in a way where there's no longer meaningful human control over the use of force. So the human operator is no longer determining specifically where or when or against what force is applied. What this means is less direct human engagement and understanding over what's happening. And it means that we're getting closer to machines making decisions over whom to kill, which we think is a moral red line, which should never be crossed. So what our campaign is calling for is the creation of a new legal instrument, a treaty that rejects this automation of killing and promotes the principle of human control over the use of force and emerging technologies. And I won't get into too much of the specifics of the details, but what we propose that legal instrument should look like is a combination of a general obligation to maintain meaningful human control over the use of force, and then prohibitions on certain weapon systems that cannot be meaningfully controlled, or those that would be able to specifically target human beings. And then in addition, positive obligations that would create regulations to ensure that meaningful human control is applied over all other weapon systems that aren't prohibited. So in our view, the threats and the risks posed by killer robots are a multitude. This is an urgent issue, and the only way to successfully address all these concerns posed by autonomy and weapons is through a comprehensive and legally binding treaty, which is what we seek.
That's really helpful for helping us to understand the urgency and the relevance of this issue. Can you tell us about the upcoming meeting, the 6th Review Conference of the CCW? What activities is the campaign carrying out in preparation for it? And how optimistic can we be that states will respond to the threat of killer robots and take appropriate action to address this threat?
Mm-hmm. So since 2013, states have been discussing questions related to, they call them lethal autonomous weapon systems, or laws, in the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, the CCW. So there have been a number of meetings throughout the years that have kind of established different benchmarks. So in the 5th Review Conference of the CCW, which was held in December 2016, a group of governmental experts was established with a mandate to explore and agree on possible recommendations on options relating to emerging technologies in the area of lethal autonomous weapon systems. That group then in 2018 agreed upon emerging commonalities, conclusions, and recommendations, including a list of 10 possible guiding principles on lethal autonomous weapons, which was then updated with another principle in 2019. So what we've seen over the course of these meetings is that most participating states have been expressing a strong desire to negotiate a new treaty to prohibit or restrict autonomous weapons or killer robots. Obviously, with the COVID pandemic, we saw kind of a reduction in action. However, over the course of 2020 and 2021, states have been continuing to discuss the development of a normative and operational framework on autonomy and weapon systems. What we're approaching now is the final meeting of the group of governmental experts this year, at the CCW and the crucial 6th Review Conference, which you mentioned. And we view this as really a pivotal moment for high contracting parties, for states to the CCW, to call for a new legally binding instrument to regulate autonomy in weapon systems. For years, we've heard from states that the CCW is the appropriate forum to discuss autonomous weapons. So now at the review conference, at these meetings, states really do have the opportunity to agree upon the safeguards that we need on autonomous weapons. And we've continued to see that momentum building towards a mandate to negotiate the legal instrument that has both those prohibitions and regulations that we seek. So we've been working hard in the lead up to these meetings to make ourselves loud and clear about what we hope states will achieve. Along those lines, we've recently launched a global action in the form of a global petition, which launched 2 weeks ago, and since launching has already garnered over 14,000 signatures worldwide. And that petition is focused on raising public awareness about killer robots, but also pressuring the international community to take action, to demonstrate to decision makers that the world is watching and that people feel that killer robots are an urgent concern, something that they don't want to see in their future, and that they demand action from policymakers. So moving towards these meetings, we're feeling that it's likely that a small number of states will move to block the consensus at the CCW, and that group may not be able to agree on a mandate to negotiate the legal instrument that we seek. However, what we are confident about is that there is a critical mass of states that is growing who have agreed upon the need to maintain human control over the use of force, who have agreed upon the need for a legal instrument, and more who have agreed upon the need to balance these prohibitions and regulations. So we're confident that regardless of the outcome of the review conference, that this group of states is building momentum on the need to move forward and to take action. And if it doesn't happen at the CCW in December, we're confident that those states will move to take action elsewhere.
Isabel, I'm sure as we understand this issue more clearly, churches and other faith-based institutions will want to respond. Can you tell us how the campaign and WCC can support other faiths to engage with the campaign and also create their own contextualized guides?
Mm-hmm. So I think one of the strengths of our coalition is that we work at a national, regional, international level. We work with different stakeholder groups, and it's a broad group of individuals and organizations who have different focuses and approaches to the work, but we all work together with one voice towards this one shared goal of a treaty that would prohibit and regulate autonomous weapons and ensure meaningful human control. And I think that in terms of the response from faith communities, where there's a real opportunity is to talk more about the ethical and moral concerns related to autonomous weapons. So, I think all members of faith communities around the world would share these concerns about delegating life and death decisions to systems or machines or programs, and how that would cross a fundamental moral line. We know that autonomous weapon systems, just inherently through their nature of being systems and programs, would lack human judgment. They would lack the human characteristics that are required to evaluate things like proportionality and distinguish between civilians and combatants, to abide by other core principles of international humanitarian law and international human rights law, which were created to protect and maintain humanity during times of violence. But even more fundamentally, killer robots would be incapable of respecting human dignity. As machines, they wouldn't be capable of feeling compassion, of understanding respect for human life, of really understanding even what the loss of human life means. They would be making those life and death decisions based on algorithms or programming or machine learning. And what that does is it reduces humanity, reduces targets to objects. And that's a process which we find incredibly dehumanizing, that it would essentially reduce us as people to lines of code, which would then be pattern matched and acted upon. So I think that there is a real opportunity for faith communities to engage more on these moral and ethical questions of what this means to take life and death decision making out of the hands of humans, to delegate that to machines, and why that is a moral line, an ethical line, which we as a collective society should agree not to cross, that there need to be moral and legal safeguards that prevent us from moving into that space. Because ultimately, if we move to allow machines to make those life and death decisions, that says a lot about what we as society are willing to accept in terms of the technology that we use across society. If we're willing to delegate that ultimate life and death decision making to machines, what does that mean about technologies that are used in other areas of our life and different types of oppressive technologies? So I think that fundamentally those moral and ethical questions need to be discussed, they need to be considered, and faith communities can create those contextualized guides based on their own interpretations or their own experiences, their own guidances in their faith, to think about how this would affect us in terms of the ultimate kind of moral decision making that we take as a global community. So I would encourage members of all faith communities to raise awareness within their own constituencies, to talk to other faith leaders and work in interfaith or multi-faith groups, and to also conduct direct outreach to make their concerns known and to communicate to decision makers that this is a matter of kind of moral and ethical limits that we want to uphold within our shared global community.
Isabel, thank you so much for being with us, and we're looking forward to collaborating with you and the campaign more in the future. Our second speaker is Reverend Koladi Fadahansi, a minister of the Methodist Church, who is currently serving as the director of the Institute of Church and Society of the Christian Council of Nigeria, as well as executive director of the Kairos Foundation of Nigeria. Reverend Koladi has over 25 years experience in advocacy, campaigning, and leadership engagements, focusing on activism for the environment, for water, sanitation, and food, as well as interfaith dialogue and disarmament. He has pioneered youth and media development programs nationally and internationally, and designed and facilitated workshops, most recently focusing particularly on the issue of killer robots. Reverend Koladi is an active member of the Nigeria Institute of Public Relations, a fellow of the Institute of Professional Managers and Administrators, in the final year stage of the Nigeria Institute of Administration, a member of the Green Faith 2021 cohort, and currently a climate faith justice student of California Lutheran University. Welcome, Reverend Koladi. It's wonderful to have you join us. Can you start by giving us an overview as to how the Institute for Church and Society became involved in advocacy for disarmament?
Thank you very much. As you may have known, that the Institute of Church and Society of the Christian Council of Nigeria is the research, advocacy, communication arm of the council. It is our duty to look into thematic issues that affect the country and also respond from the faith angle. Therefore, in the year 2017, we begin to discover that one of the crucial issues that is affecting us in Nigeria is that proliferation of small arms and light weapons, which is causing instability, which is causing chaos, and also which is dividing the people, creating a lot of uncertainty and intolerance amongst us. So we discovered that we have to put ammunition and armaments together, and gradually we started working on the ATT, the Arms Trade Treaty. We included the nuclear weapons, which we support our Nigerian government to get the treaty that prohibits nuclear weapons, and from there we moved to killer robots, the leader and autonomous weapons, and also supporting system and the government to continue journeying on this, and also giving the voice to the churches in Nigeria to support that discourse. So for us, it is our work as Christian churches as a research arm of the council to look at this critical issue, this critical issue that is currently ravaging the country, creating uncertainty and disturbances here and there in Nigeria. So we have a 5-year work plan, strategic work plan developed since 2017, which we are pursuing. And by 2022, that is next year, we'll look at what we have done and the grounds that we have covered in the area of disarmament, especially these 3 that I've mentioned: the small arms and light weapons, the nuclear weapon, and the either autonomous weapon systems and robots. Thank you very much.
Reverend Koladi, I really appreciate how you've connected the issues of the ATT, the TPNW, and killer robots. Let's dig in a little deeper to the issue of killer robots. What activities have you carried out to raise awareness about killer robots in the last couple of years?
Yeah, thank you very much. As a research and advocacy institute, we look at the issue of killer robots as a very new campaign area and work among the churches and even the communities in Nigeria. So we started working with the Human Rights and Disarmament Unit of the CCI of the World Council of Churches in the area of creating awareness, making the understanding of our leaders, religious leaders, to be well grounded on this issue. So we've carried out workshops, we have done advocacy and sensitization with different groups and layers of the church and community. We've also printed literatures to create a better understanding of the campaign. For example, we've engaged with the youth wing. We've taken our churches one by one, the member churches of the council, one by one, addressing their synod, addressing their youth wings, and even the women's wing. We have also done sectorial advocacy, engaging the women's wing of the Nigerian Union of Journalists, especially the chapter here in Oyo State, where our office is located. And we move forward to also, at every forum, speak with the councils in the state chapters across Nigeria, encouraging them to step this campaign down so that the awareness is total, so that we have a holistic response to the issue, even as we move further to engage our government. For example, we've written letters to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, first United Nations desk that is responsible for issue of disarmament in Nigeria. And also we have created an entry point into the legislature, the parliament, to also engage the parliamentary committee on human rights and disarmament at that level. So by and large, at this stage, we are still creating awareness and working on advocacy, moving towards having a concrete intervention that will be all-encompassing, so that we'll be able to contribute. Because for us as a church and as an organization that is responsible for directing the advocacy and the campaign aspect of the council, it is all important for us to be able to encourage and also create a better understanding of any work that we want to do, and also guide the church appropriately in their response and approach to such work. So at this stage, we are still promoting the concept of creating awareness on killer robots, engaging advocacy initiatives, and building the coming in, the entry into the campaign of different sectors and organs in society that we feel will be able to journey with us. We've done virtual meetings last year, like 2 or 3 times, so that we are not stalled as we move on in the campaign.
Your work offers us a model that many other churches can benefit from. As a country which continues to face instability and conflict, how have young people in Nigeria responded to the messages you've shared?
Yeah, thank you very much. You know, like I said earlier, this is a very new topic, and this is a very challenging campaign for us in Nigeria. One, because of the prevailing situation of uncertainty, unemployment, poverty, and also that we are coming from a country that is advancing, that is developing. So some of our young people initially do not see this as something that is of importance to us. But when we bring the dimension of how we graduated from small arms and light weapon to nuclear weapon, and also bringing in that it is an international concern that doesn't recognize its border, that doesn't recognize the fact that you build it or you have it, but that it can be used anywhere and the effect can be remote and residual. So they begin to pick interest and also allowing us to enter into their space to discuss, and they start participating in our workshops, in our programs, and also taking it upon themselves to step it down. So there is a high level of reception to this campaign among the young people, and especially for some of them that are highly inquisitive, that want to draw the line between killer robot, leader on autonomous weapon system, and also the artificial intelligence. Especially in the universities, the young people want to know how we can separate, how we can differentiate between laws and also the artificial intelligence that produces drone, which people use in their photography, which they use on their farms to monitor climate condition and weather situations. So it has become something that is both academic and also practical for young people in Nigeria. And so they are receiving and participating. And I know that one of the challenges that we have now is that we have not been able to cover a wide spectrum of young people to actually bring them on board more effectively on this campaign. And I think that is the direction we'll be looking at, and also engaging women more constructively so that the voices will be together on this issue.
Thank you so much, Reverend Kolati, for joining us. We're so pleased to have you leading the way on this issue. We now welcome Bishop Michael Vorster. Bishop Michael is a director of ecumenical affairs for Methodist Church of Southern Africa, as well as ministering in local churches. He's been heavily involved in the anti-apartheid movement and was involved in the Peace Monitor training ahead of the first South African democratic election in the 1990s, working to address violence, particularly in KwaZulu-Natal. He's been active in the End Conscription campaign and has worked with interfaith bodies and other related organizations. He's received numerous awards for his work, including the 2015 Diaconia Council of Churches Human Rights Award. Since 2018, through the All Africa Council of Churches, Bishop Michael has been involved in the campaign to stop killer robots. Bishop Michael, we'd like to particularly thank you for the written contribution to the booklet, which you gave earlier in 2021, and which helped us shape the final drafting of this project. I'm wondering if you can begin by telling us how the Southern Methodist Church has been involved in this issue.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for this opportunity. I think one of the things, in terms of just a bit of background, that the Methodist Church for Southern Africa has had a long-standing resolution on weaponry. And basically, let me just quote from their resolution, which I think it's important to say this because it sort of gives a bit of context as to why we need to be involved in the killer robot campaign. So what we have said is that trust in lethal weapons is a sign of our failure to fashion a society free of violence and fear. The only long-term answer to this problem lies in obeying God's teaching about caring, human relationships, and respect for life. And I think that, given that background, it became very important for us to become involved in the killer robot campaign. And this started after attending the African Regional Conference on Nuclear Disarmament and Lethal Autonomous Weapons, which was held with about 20 African embassies, scientists, ethics specialists, and religious leaders from in August 2018 here in South Africa. I took this, I gave feedback to our church about this event, and a resolution was passed at our conference, which noted with concern that the advent of the fourth industrial revolution has given rise to technology that can harm us as humans. And we then set up a task team to look specifically at the whole area of the fourth industrial revolution, and then particularly around the issue of the killer robots. Yes, I think we still need to do quite a bit of work with the various councils of churches, certainly within the SADC and Southern African region. And there's a growing interest, certainly in the initial phase of us beginning to make people aware of that, based on on some of the WCC material that's already available and some of the KRC's material that's available. So the various councils of churches, like the Mozambique Council of Churches, the Council of Churches in Swaziland, Namibia Christian Council, the Lesotho Council of Churches, and Botswana Council of Churches are the ones that we mainly work with. And so the intention is that we will start a mass distribution of multilingual one-page published awareness killer robots leaflets, both for all our bishops who kind of cover the whole of Southern Africa, and then also with the various sort of councils of churches or Christian councils that many of them are known. And then also I'm an executive member of the Religions for Peace South Africa, and already the All Africa Council of Religious Leaders are on board with this, and we just need to bring the Religions for Peace of South Africa on board. And so that will be one of my tasks over the next while, is to get them also to begin to think about writing to certainly the South African government, and also there's an interfaith body in Mozambique, and I'm in contact with that person, and I'm hoping that I will also help them to begin to lobby and advocate for their government. So that basically is the broad sort of strategy that and approach that we will have. The challenge, of course, is that, for instance, in Eswatini, I know that the Council of Churches are very caught up with the unrest and the struggle that's happening there at the moment, the same as in Mozambique. But nevertheless, we will keep on trying and helping those various councils of churches be strengthened to lobby their governments around this particular issue. So I think that it's, this is that's really where we are at the moment.
How then did you start to engage governments and others in the faith communities on the region in this issue? And what has been their response?
We passed another resolution where we said that we asked the presiding bishop of Southern Africa, we include 6 countries in what we call our connection under our authority of Methodists, to write to those respective governments, asking them to join other governments in calling for the banning, broadly speaking, of the development of the lethal autonomous weapons. So this was written to countries like Mozambique, South Africa, Eswatini, Swaziland, and Botswana, Lesotho, and Namibia. But we know that Namibia is already way ahead of everybody else and has already agreed to signing, agreed to the banning of these lethal autonomous weapons. So it's a campaign that has been difficult to motivate some of our governments here, because many of them are caught up with their own local conflicts. For instance, in Mozambique, they've recently had an outbreak of insurgency in northern Mozambique, so most of their time and energy has been spent doing that. In Swaziland, there's also been an outbreak of unrest and protests. But nevertheless, we did get a response from the South African government, who, in a sense, have said, yes, they will be looking into this, but I think we just need more work, and we need more work in the other countries, and perhaps get the Namibian government to try and persuade the others to come on board as well. So that has been a major response at the moment, and we need, of course, to follow up on some of those. We of course, have networked with other organizations in Southern Africa, in South Africa in particular, to help strengthen. I believe that we need as many voices as possible. I think that we need voices from the interreligious community, and that's really what our plans are at the moment. Is I'm asking the Religions for Peace in South Africa to begin to respond as well. So that broadly is what the Methodist Church of Southern Africa, its response to the killer robot campaign.
Finally, Bishop Michael, can you tell us practically how you will use this booklet?
I think this is a very important and valuable resource for us. I think that firstly, it will add to whatever else we do and flesh it out a bit more. And so we will ensure that all our bishops, certainly in the Methodist Church of Southern Africa, get a copy. We will ensure that all the councils of churches and interfaith bodies have a copy. And perhaps we would also have a webinar to introduce the booklet to everybody within the Southern African context and beyond that. So I think this booklet is going to be very helpful, because I think the idea of this killer robot campaign is very new, and especially in the minds of many of our people. I mean, they, when I remember the one webinar that we spoke at, one of the bishops said that we should be more interested in small arms, because that's what's killing people every day. And so of course we took that on board as well, and said, yes, we already have resolutions around that, and what we need to do is implement that. This is a very important campaign that we need to be a part of. So I think the booklet is going to help a lot to have something in certainly all the bishops, all the church leaders' hands. And I will also target very influential people within the church as well, to bring them on board. So I really, really do think that this booklet is going to help, because it places it within the context of the religious community, which is broadly, of course, where I operate, and that's the mandate that I operate within.
Thank you, Bishop Michael. It's been a pleasure to work with you on this project, and we look forward to future collaborations. Finally, we welcome Bishop Christopher Coxworth. Bishop Christopher is the Bishop of Coventry. Prior to his ordination, he was a teacher of secondary education and continued to serve in various other areas of education. His work led him to being awarded an honorary degree of Doctor of Divinity by the University of London for his services to education. In 2012, he entered the House of Lords as a Lord Spiritual, the name given to the bishops of the Church of England who serve in the House of Lords. Bishop Christopher has been a strong advocate for nuclear disarmament, and we are delighted that he is now engaging on the issue of the serious threats posed by killer robots. We're especially grateful to him for providing the foreword to this booklet. Bishop Christopher, you're a strong advocate for disarmament, and we've welcomed the many times you've called upon the UK government to reconsider its possession of nuclear weapons. What role can the church in your country also play to raise awareness of the threat of killer robots?
Well, thank you for your kind words. Well, as a church, before anything else, we start with prayer. Prayer is our way of raising awareness Christianly. Prayer lifts us to the perspective of God and enables us to work with God's heart for peace. And liturgical prayer, corporate prayer, is the way we share what's on our heart and what's on God's heart with each other. Prayer allows us to confront issues with honesty and humility, and through God's Spirit to be spurred into Christian action and witness in the world. Prayer is empowerment. Now, raising awareness of the threat of killer robots, we have to admit, is not entirely straightforward in the church, because they are not yet, generally speaking, well understood by our congregations. They seem too distant a threat and seem like too technical an issue to be handled in, say, a sermon. But what all churches can do more broadly is to encourage Christians to engage with the subject of artificial intelligence and to begin there with its ethical implications. We're starting to do that as the Church of England, to think critically about how we engage with these advanced technologies. And by overlapping these concerns with our well-established discourse on weaponry, especially nuclear, disarmament, on peace building, the church will be better placed to raise awareness more broadly in society of this unique threat. Indeed, the problem with killer robots is a distinctively ethical one. It strikes at the very core of our common humanity, and how we relate to each other is one of those radical innovations which should encourage us to pause and think. Christians who will always take the long-term view on issues like these can raise awareness by focusing on the key gospel message of life and all those things which threaten not just lives, but life itself, and which would seek to degenerate our common life and to make it less than the flourishing vision of what it could be. In specific terms, the Church of England is blessed to have a voice that extends right into the centre of public and political arena. Along with some other bishops, I have a seat in the House of Lords, the UK's second parliamentary chamber, as you kindly acknowledged. And here we can make interventions, recommendations, and request answers from government ministers. But we can only do so much. We rely on Christian people to contact their MPs in courteous ways to encourage them to take these new dangers really seriously. And of course, in the Church of England, we also have our synods, as other churches have their different forms of councils. And our diocesan and general synods often engage directly with topics of wider political and social importance, as we have done with nuclear weapons, for example. And I imagine these issues surrounding artificial intelligence and how they play into killer robots will be on our agenda before too long. And then finally, we have a national voice, a leadership which is not afraid to speak out and which generally is listened to when issues of concern like these are raised. But it's not something we can address alone, either as the Church of England or as the churches of the UK. We need to maximize our deep ecumenical ties to allow us to build together an international coalition against killer robots, this new threat, dangerous threat to the peace of the world.
What are the challenges of advocating for disarmament in a country which manufactures and exports weapons? And how do congregations respond to this?
That's a good question. Well, it can be a challenge to advocate for disarmament when many jobs and therefore many livelihoods depend upon this industry. And when in trade terms, we get billions annually from weapon sales. And I speak from a city that has a long stake and a strong stake in the defense industry, especially during the First and Second World Wars. And we need to offer economically convincing ways of weaning our economy off the sale of arms. And there are such economically convincing ways. The passion that Christians have, we have to recognize, for peace can be interpreted by some as showing a sort of disregard for national security and for what others perceive to be even greater threats to our safety, which might require advanced, enhanced technological capabilities in response. It's also challenging when the development and production of arms is often shrouded in secrecy and sensitivity, as we've seen with nuclear. Our governments are rarely as transparent as they could be about these things. And that's one of the reasons why I'm grateful for our place in the House of Lords. It does allow us to interrogate government in a very direct and specific way, as we have done over arms sales to Saudi Arabia. What we're trying to do is to reframe the narrative somewhat, to get people, including our congregations, to rethink what we mean by safety and security. The thing about killer robots is that they're not yet being produced on a grand scale. But broadly speaking, the technology exists, which will surely sweep its way into production. Unless, of course, we seize, and this is why we have an opportunity now, unless we seize now this small window of opportunity we have to make it clear that the basic principle to find ways to make war easier is utterly counterproductive, that we need clear definitions surrounding this kind of weaponry, and that we need to take decisive action to prevent further development and to make their use completely unthinkable. I'm actually hopeful that perhaps, unlike the more divisive issue of nuclear weapons, our church and society might be able to find common ground on the issue of killer robots much more readily. There are fewer vested interests at play at the moment, and opinions haven't yet hardened. The related challenge, of course, is that if these weapons do not yet fully exist, at least in the common psyche, it might be difficult for some to even form opinions at all. And that's why we do need to raise awareness and work together as Christians. And we need to speak prophetically. That's part of our calling. We need to warn of the potential. After all, scientists are already doing that. At the very least, we know that an arms race is counterproductive, it's wasteful, it's destabilizing. We're seeing that in geopolitics at the moment.
Bishop Christopher, what advice would you give and what experiences can you share with church leaders around the world about engaging in disarmament advocacy?
I think what I have to say is very much influenced by my present place, my context in Coventry, in the middle of England. I've been here now, I'm in my 14th year now, and it's had a profound effect on me. And my experience here in Coventry tells me of the need for us to confront our common vulnerability. Violence starts with a denial of vulnerability, but it also starts with the misguided belief that another's vulnerability can be exploited through power as a means to even greater power. In reality, of course, we all share a unique human vulnerability. Every time I walk through the ruins of the bombed out Coventry Cathedral, which still stand there, I'm confronted with these two things that we have in common. On the one hand, our human vulnerability, and on the other, our human capacity for sin. And that's why at the heart of our life here is a very simple prayer, simply, Father, forgive. Forgive us all, not just them. I think only Jesus could pray that prayer, forgive them. We must pray, Father, forgive, simply. And that moves us into the territory of responsibility, which is a really interesting concept, going right to the heart of my own approach to disarmament advocacy. Responsibility works in two directions. We think about it retrospectively, as it were. We look to the past and we claim responsibility for our past failings. We're all responsible for the failings of the world. And it also looks forward. We have a responsibility together to our future, to make the world a safer and more peaceful place. Coventry, the ruined cathedral standing next to the new cathedral, which was built, as it were, out of its ashes, a new building. Those two cathedrals standing together brings these ways of looking at responsibility together and frames them vividly in Christian terms, from darkness to light, from death to resurrection. Coventry has taught me to avoid dividing people into political or ideological camps, into good or evil categories, but rather to invite everyone on a journey through our common brokenness into our common potential for goodness under God, from the old cathedral to the new. It's a powerful journey. Finding this kind of common ground in tears and in laughter has been central to my own approach on issues relating to peace, conflict, and to disarmament, more specifically.
Bishop Christopher, thank you for sharing your experiences. We're sure that your suggestions will inspire churches in other countries to get involved in advocating against killer robots. Thank you so much all for joining us for this webinar to launch the campaign guide for churches to engage in advocacy to ban killer robots, which is now available on our website. And we look forward to you and your church joining us in this effort.